Hello, Thought Roomies, and welcome back to the Thought Room. I'm so happy that you're here once again. And this week, we have an episode that I am so delighted to present to you. I cannot explain how delicious it feels when I get to drop in with somebody at this level, when I get to really ask deep, meaningful questions that stir all kinds of emotion and have me reflecting on my own experience. And this episode is a little bit unique in that you'll get to hear me being asked a lot of questions. And that is because my guest today, Max McCoy, is just such a fantastic podcaster and interview himself. He has a show called Looking Up. You can find it everywhere that you find your podcasts. And I can tell you, if you like my show, you're also going to love Max's show. So check that out, Looking Up Podcast. I don't need to say much other than I believe that this interview will touch you as the way in the same way that it touched me while I was in it. We finished recording it just a few minutes ago, and I am still reeling from the delightful energy of it. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, get deep and get vulnerable with myself and the wonderful Max McCoy.
Hallie Rose.
Hey!
What's happening? Thanks for having me.
Max McCoy, welcome to the Thought Room.
We just went over each other's names. Welcome to Looking Up as well. I think I'm going to steal this.
Yeah, that was unexpected. I like that. Yeah. You jumped right in.
Yeah.
Welcome to my show, and you can welcome me to yours.
Yeah, welcome to Looking Up. I'm here in Austin, Texas. First time here. Super glad to be with you.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. It feels like, again, we were just talking about this, but the people that have been connected with the show and end up sitting on couches with me, it's so synchronistic the way that it all links up. And when you and I first connected over Instagram, you were in LA, I was somewhere in Canada, and we just started following each other's work, I believe, and I started getting your newsletter. And every once in a while, I would just email you and be like, dope newsletter. Yeah. That was pretty much like the extent of our interactions for a while.
Yeah.
And then we talked about doing a podcast together. And I let you know that, sorry, I only do them in person. So it was kind of like this, oh my gosh, when are we going to be in the same place at the same time? And then a couple of weeks ago, you sent me a text and said, hey, I'm going to be in Austin. And I was really, really excited to finally get to know you because I feel like I already knew you.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing about podcasting. It pulls you towards certain people that when you come from that spiritual perspective, it's like, I was meant to connect with you. And then it's just like from one person to the next. And it's such a beautiful container that podcasting can be. So I feel the same way. I'm super glad. And yeah, there's so many people you connect with online. Oh, I would love to meet you. And then you never do.
Totally.
So I was glad we were able to make it happen like relatively quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've been sitting for a while now. And I was like, we should probably hit record because all of this is so good. I'm sure people would really benefit from some of the conversations we've been having. Where do you want to jump in? I mean, you have so much. You've been traveling around. You were just in Tulum. We were just talking about this idea of being a wanderer too. Yeah. And I think both of us kind of resonate with that archetype of moving from one place to the other. And I was sharing with you my experience trying to actually put roots down somewhere new here in Austin. So
yeah. And I think it's like attracts like, and I think we both just conjoined at this moment in a very similar time because I've Tulum was amazing. And I thought it was this kickstart of what might be like a 6 to 12 month travel experience. And I had a beautiful 2 weeks. You know, when you travel, I was telling you, you feel this like connection to some new part of yourself. You feel this connection to like what I would call God. It's like you're just dancing with so much uncertainty and it's invigorating. But then I actually got COVID and I knew I was going to come back and see my parents for the holidays. So I was very cautious and did the whole quarantine. And it was like the opposite of that archetype that we're both living. For me, I'm the seeker, I'm the what's around the corner, and I couldn't do that. And then to be in a foreign country and go through that, it was the ultimate like sitting with myself, just really looking at like that part of me that is unwilling to just sit and be here. And I think there's a lot coming up for both of us. It sounded like in the conversation before this with the fear of putting your roots down where you are.
Yeah.
And it takes something within you to not always be like, what's around the corner? What's, this is cool, but what's
the grass
over
is
there?
Greener.
Yeah. And for me, that's been, it's been a learning process. I'm early in it. And we were talking about, I know you're doing the conscious man. For me, that is a part of an embodiment of the man I want to be. It's like, I know a lot of older guys that I'm friends with, and they're in this perpetual seeking, this perpetual lust. And I see that and I'm like, it's a bit of a boy psychology there that I can feel within myself. That's why I can see it in you, but I know I don't want that. And so what is the opposite of that? What is the opposite of seeking outside of yourself all the time? It's kind of learning to be okay with where you are.
What does the balanced and conscious man's version of seeking look like, right? Because it's not like you have to kill off the seeking altogether.
Absolutely.
But how is that piece tempered between the boy and the man?
Can you ask that a different way?
You talked about the boy archetype sort of being one that's like lustful and sort of, honestly, the image that comes to mind is someone like spreading their seed everywhere. Just like, I don't know, like both sexually and energetically and in career and kind of chaotically, I've got all these different things on different burners. So when we step into what a conscious man, how he hones his sexual and creative energy and he directs it, he's still a seeker, but how is that seeking nuanced from what the boy is doing?
Yeah, no, and I wish I had the perfect answer, but it's still something I'm in the questioning right now. I'm in the questioning and listening, and what I've found in myself that kind of at least gave me the courage to start really considering just putting my roots down to an extent I never have before was, and you were great at articulating like that seeker never will leave us. But for me, the difference maybe is that the embodied man that I'm trying to step into puts his roots down in a way so that seeker almost has security to come home to. And that seeker almost now has a new platform on which to build, you know? That seeker, if he doesn't have that foundation of home, of community, of roots, of groundedness, only has a certain amount of depth to him. And though he's having all these beautiful experiences and meeting all these people and connecting, and maybe pursuing his career in a way that he thinks is meaningful. And when I say he, I'm basically just objectifying myself. He just doesn't have that depth to really step into and make all those experiences as powerful as he could be had he had that home groundedness, I believe.
Totally. And this is something too that I've been really fascinated with. I was telling you about the work of David Data and the book, The Way of the Superior Man, that I have all of the men in the Conscious Man reading this week for homework.
Yeah.
And one essence that I've gleaned from that material is when we talk about what is a conscious man and the experience of his emotions. And this ties to sexuality as well, because it's like how you do one thing is how you do everything. But when raw energy arises, be it emotional or sexual, the practice is to neither shove it down nor let it fly, like if that makes sense. So when I think the untempered, like the boy archetype is that inability to hold, right? To hold the container, to be in that strength, that masculine, that healed masculine strength. So yeah, and that just looks like unbridled sexual energy that's leaked everywhere, or creative energy that doesn't really go anywhere, right?
That's been my favorite container, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you think you're doing a lot, but you're really just spraying.
Right. And so like that's, and that's why teenage boys, it's that expression of anger. Just like it arises and they express it without thinking, as this kind of like just angry. And that's the hormones, right? It's just like just firing off. So as we mature into our ability to hold things, it looks like the experience of the emotion coming up, or the experience of the sexual energy coming up. Say you see an attractive woman, you feel that sexual energy, and you don't tell yourself, no, I shouldn't be feeling sexual towards her. I'm partnered. I shouldn't be looking. It's like, oh, wow, that's a beautiful woman. That's it.
Yeah.
You're not shaming yourself. You're not bypassing it. And you're also not maybe actively engaging with it. But there's this space in between that's very healthy and healed, where you can just allow the experience without needing to go off any deep ends. Does that make sense?
It's beautiful. And yeah, and I just imagine, I mean, that wanderer boy, I could just, when you said that, I had the beautiful like image that came to me of just any time that would come up in any, whether it's a girl or, you know, any discomfort, that might be his cue to go. That might be his quote unquote intuition telling me it's time to move on. Yeah. And I know you like to journal. Journaling's such a big one for me, and to kind of reflect to myself and articulate to myself the story I'm living, and to process. And the way I've been closing out most of my journal prompts this week has been just don't move, like you're okay. And then I kept saying to myself, I read this quote, I wish I could articulate it, but you know, emotions are strongest when they're on their way out. And then it said, sit in the fire.
Ooh, I love that.
And as you were saying that, it just was like
fire, man.
It was and that's how I'm closing out my journals. It's like, it's okay. You're okay. Sit in the fire. And as you said, that was just beautiful what you said. And that came to me.
I love that. And when you said sit in the fire, I kept dropping back to my desire to use this word like tempered. And I'm thinking of materials that are tempered when they're put into the fire and then they're brought onto the anvil, and we're hammering out, you know, all the edges, and we're making this hunk of kind of crude metal into a really sharpened weapon. I love that.
Our, you know, Godsey on my podcast, who I know you're friends with, he had a quote that rang, you know, stuck with me forever. And it's the difference between a boy and a king is that the king doesn't look away. And that's just another iteration of sit in the fire. It's like when you have that thing, when you see that woman that kind of triggers something in you, or when you have that urge to just run away, like instead of looking away, just look at it, sit in the fire.
You're reminding me, I have no idea why I'm being pulled to this, but maybe again, it's the way my brain is working right now, because I told you I microdosed some mushrooms this morning. But you're reminding me of a time a couple of years ago when I went through this deep period of lucid dreaming, but also popping out of some really unique brainwave states as I was falling asleep. I didn't know that's what was happening at the time, but now I've read up a little bit to be like, oh, okay, that's what was going on. So I was falling into these in-between meditative states, right, and most of us do to some degree, right before I fell asleep. In fact, I can't remember which inventor it was, but he used to, some famous inventor, I wish I knew, he would have a handful of coins. Do you know the story?
No.
So he would sit up in a chair, and he would have a handful of coins with a metal plate underneath. And he would try to just get so deeply relaxed. But then the moment he fell completely asleep, his hand would relax and the coins would fall onto the metal plate and wake him up. So he would use this to not let himself fall completely asleep. And he would stay in that ultimate brainwave state in between where creativity is the richest. So I went through this unintentionally, this period of time where I would spend a longer chronological amount of time in that in-between state before really falling asleep. I have no idea why. My brain chemistry at the time. And what I would see would be these random images, almost like I had a movie screen in front of my face, and it was just juxtaposition of people's faces I didn't know, just snapshots of the human experience, like a woman smoking on a balcony, and then cut to a child's crying face, cut to someone starving of poverty, cut to, it was just, some of them were highly traumatic images, and other ones were just pretty benign. And I remember being like, what is this? And why am I seeing this? And the sense that I got back when I asked that question was, you're here to witness. You're here to just allow. You don't have to do anything with it. You just have to agree to witness the human experience. And some of it, as the weeks went on, it got more increasingly, some of it was really violent. And I would be having these images of violent, people being killed or raped, and I would just feel like I was in a movie theater seat where I was strapped in and couldn't move because my body was kind of already in sleep paralysis. I'd be like, why am I seeing these disturbed things? And it was like, just watch. Deepen your capacity to understand human suffering.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, to feel like it's humbling.
Just to allow it, because I think what we do so often is, you and I were talking about this before we started recording, that people pleaser thing where we don't want to see others hurt, but really it's because we love the other person, but really it's because we're afraid that we are going to have to be affected by that hurt. We don't want the guilt of that hurt. We don't want to, have to feel the pain of that in any way, shape, or form. So we take actions that really sometimes allow us to avoid being in our truth fully and completely because we're afraid of the repercussions. And so if we can, I think, exercise that muscle of allowing people to have the fullness of their experience without needing to change it, this is how we bridge the gap between self and other. And we realize that at our core, we're really all the same.
Yeah, we were talking about that because I articulated to you my tendency to, I know my palette of colors, and I'll want to maybe show to a person that I don't feel maybe safe enough to show all my colors with. My ego story will be like, for their benefit, I'm only going to show you 2 of my colors because I know the rest of my colors you won't really be able to process. And you kind of pushed me on that. And you said, well, like, how would you know that? Take them through the experience, give them the sovereignty, you told me. And I actually got a beautiful message from a follower this morning. And I usually don't write back long, thoughtful answers like I did today, but it was this girl, and she said her New Year's resolution this year was to step into and start speaking her truth. And I was like, beautiful. That's a great one. So many times it's like, I want to work out this, but to speak my truth, what a beautiful resolution. And she said she immediately felt all this pushback from people like her mom. And she reached out to me. She's like, how'd you get to this place to be so comfortable sharing your life on the internet? What does your family think? What do your friends think?
Right.
And it allowed me to reflect. And I was like, it's like, I almost didn't deserve as much credit as she was giving me, because I'm like, on the internet, it's easy, but it's almost in those relationships that I'm so prone to only show a couple of my colors. And so I loved that you pushed me on that. How do we go about, how do you go about, that's part of the standing in the fire. Like, how do you go, I'm learning I need to be okay with other people's discomfort. If my truth is uncomfortable for them, it's a crazy dance, to learn.
Yeah. And I mean, some of that discomfort, it might be real or imagined, like you're projecting it. So how can you really know? Again, we talked about not robbing people of the experience of having their reaction to you, because in the reaction, whether you want to label it positive or negative, they're learning. They're learning about themselves. They're learning about you. They're learning about the world. Everybody's honing their preferences. This feels good. This doesn't. To show up as a version of yourself that's not truthful, like half-assing it, you're just tricking everyone, and you're not happy, and they're never going to get to know you, and you can't really be in full intimacy that way.
Yeah.
But then to drop back to compassion, because why do we do that? We all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted. So we don't have to shame ourselves if we're not really ready yet, but just to be gentle and realize, okay, yes, Max, this is because you want to bond. You want to be accepted. And maybe these are parts of you that you really like, but feel scary.
Yeah. And I think it's those new parts of yourself, like, or those budding parts of yourself, the parts of yourself that you're still learning to cultivate and nurture. And you don't even know what they are yet. You haven't gotten that reflection back enough to be like, I don't know how this will be received.
What are the budding parts of you that feel scary to share?
Yeah, this is beautiful. I was an athlete growing up, a really talented athlete. I worked really hard. That's where I got I channeled everything into my sport. And that was a spiritual path for me, though I didn't know it at the time. Mm-hmm. Everybody in my life knew me as that person, family, friends. And though I felt like such before I committed myself fully to the sport, I was an artist. I was a spiritual, like, young kid. I was, all kids are. I was colorful. Mm. And then I limited my colors for the next 6 years of my life. I played college basketball. And so I lived in that comfort of what other people kind of painted onto me, who I was. I was the basketball player, even though it irked me when people kind of assumed that's all I was. For so long, that was my archetype. And so I think anything that strays way too far from that, from what I think that almost quote unquote jockey type guy is, almost like that false image of what a masculine male is. That's what I project onto people. That's what I project people will think about me from my past. People who knew me then, I'm like, who I am now has gone so far into all these different colors. Mm-hmm. So it's that, I would say, the feminine, the spiritual, just the parts of myself that I had forgotten. And I am so glad that I have refound them. Yeah. And I actually resonate with them. And that is actually the truth of who I am. So those are the parts of me budding still. And, it's a forever budding. I think that side of us. But in those older relationships, it is that, can I let you into this new world? Or will you be okay? And will I be okay? Right. And that's been a dance. Yeah. It's like, what is the worst? I love unpacking this. And one more thing, it came through in the work that I do. I started my brand as a sports performance brand. And even though I was in this new world, I still was like, okay, I know I have value there. Right. And so I started talking about mental health and emotional health within sports, because I was like, this is my world, but I'm going to kind of introduce this world into the world I'm in now. And it kind of evolved, and then I had to surrender into, this is just me. This is Max McCoy, always changing. But and so it's been a journey of me transitioning into that, allowing of all colors. Yeah, because we're not just one thing, we're so dynamic, and we are constantly going through these new iterations, and the change itself is painful enough, but then we heap on extra amounts of suffering and pain when we cling on to stories about how things need to be or should be, or how people will perceive them. And again, I talk about this all the time on the podcast, but the Buddhists call it the second arrow. So it's not only are you experiencing the initial change or feeling, you're heaping yourself with other negative emotions and keeping yourself very small. So what I want to ask you is, when you think about, okay, tomorrow I'm just going to pull the ripcord of the rainbow parachute and be the most wild version just of run around Max. Naked. Run around naked. And you think about that, and we're laughing because the image of that is really unbridled, right? It's joyful, and it's just you, and it's expansive. And I don't mean you're literally running around naked, but if you were just going to be let your freak flag fly. Yeah. Is that what the cool kids say? You're no comment. If you were going to do that. No comment. Whatever they say.
Well, like, what's the fear? What's the fear that, okay, if I did that tomorrow and started posting stuff on my Instagram that wasn't just about like Kobe Bryant or like basketball or like whatever, and like a little bit of mindset, what would happen? Would you lose followers? Would people reach, what's the imagined worst case scenario?
Yeah. And I've been processing this, and I can now look at what I do and be like, I'm showing up as Max. Always there's more room for authenticity, always. But the fear for a long time, and probably still to an extent, is, fear of, I guess, letting people down that felt like I was something. And then now maybe I'm breaking the paradigm of what it's almost like I've heard this quote, Jay Shetty said, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. My ego is projecting onto you what you're projecting onto me. And so the fear was letting people down that thought they knew me. And now all of a sudden they're going to be like, oh, he's not who I thought he was. Losing followers. That's the business side. But then on a more personal note, the people that knew me for a long time is like, it's this judgment that I project onto them. Like, who does he think he is? Where Max really fell off the deep end, and I think, it lets me look at maybe the old conditioning I had to people who were like who I am now when I was like younger, what I heard about those people, simple things like people who meditated, did yoga. Like I was like, oh, those are,
totally.
And that's who I am now. And, it's the judgment.
Yeah.
Projected judgment.
Still some resistance to. Surrender. But that's normal.
But that's a good thought exercise. Like, what would it look like if I showed up freak flag flying?
I think it's just, I think it's just really illuminating. Because then as I was hearing you talk, I was kind of watching your eyes.
Tell me.
Awaken to, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I hear the words that are coming out of my mouth. And some of it does sound just like the ego being afraid of what other people are going to think and your projection of that. Because again, that's an assumption. You could put your freak flag out there and people could be like, oh yes, I'm so glad this dude's talking about this because I've been thinking this and I've been wanting to learn about this thing, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's yoga or breath work. And he's like me. He reminds me of me and I resonate with his voice and the way that he shows up in the world. I like this guy even more now, And I think there was a fear of being almost protective of that earlier stage of my work, of those kids that like younger, demographic, like 16 to 20. Yeah.
Reaching those people in the way that I did. And almost like I was reaching them in a very logical form, where now I'm much more just like, here's my, like a spiritual expression. It was almost too like a protectiveness of them. And I think what you just said was so beautiful because it was like, maybe my truth probably could reach them even more so, but I think I can have compassion because I was like, I saw myself in those kids. Yeah. And I didn't want to lose that,
And maybe you can still protect them without protecting them from the truth of who you are. And is there a graceful way to loop them into your process as a vulnerable, conscious man and say, yeah, I used to do a lot of this. Now I'm playing around in this. Don't know how it's going to go. Let you guys know.
That's beautiful.
Just take the pressure off yourself.
And I think the biggest illuminating factor that all of me isn't out yet, and we talked about it right before we pressed record, I just said, I haven't told my audience, or I haven't really addressed my audience in this way yet. And it's around psychedelics. And so you could look at my work and be like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. This guy seems like an open book, but there's still that piece. And I think you just so beautifully danced on our way to that, to this psychedelics. And if you saw my work, I love personal development. I love reading. I love journaling. I love doing the inner work. I love meditation. And those are all amazing tools. But I wouldn't be here if it weren't for psychedelics. I would not be on this path without psychedelics. I was going left and psychedelics turned me right. Like, whoa. I thought I was one person, and then psychedelics reminded me, you are this person. It like I said, before basketball, I was this colorful version of myself, because I didn't even really have an ego at that age. Yeah. I was just, who I am is who I am. I'll go wherever I feel called.
Well, you don't have an awareness of the ego.
Yeah.
But really, it's like we're all ego at that point.
Very true. But I mean, yeah, that's true. I think we all are. When you're at a certain age, you can remember when you had a curiosity, you followed it. When you wanted to do something, you followed it. When you wanted to say something, you just said it. And then I molded myself, and that first psychedelic experience was the first time that I had felt viscerally who I was before that chapter.
Yeah.
And it turned me on a path that changed forever. It turned me to certain books. It made me really dedicate myself to a meditation practice. And then ever then since, I've been using them in a mindful and conscious way that has been guiding my life.
Right.
And the background of you is incredible with psychedelics. And I have so many questions for you, but
yeah.
Do you have somewhere you wanted to take that, or?
No, I want to say thank you for your bravery.
Thank you. Beautiful container.
Second, congratulations on coming forward with another one of your colors and sharing it with the world in this beautiful way. And thirdly, I totally resonate with your fear around talking about psychedelics for the first time and the impact that they have on our lives, and how that happened for me was that I told you I had been interviewing people about psychedelics on my podcast, about their experiences, and how was that for you? And I think it was about episode, I don't remember, I think it was around 10 or 11, maybe 12, where I had Eric Godsey on for the first time. And right out the gate, he just says, so I'm interviewing him about his ayahuasca, his first ever ayahuasca experience. We were there in Costa Rica the day after together.
Wow.
Yeah.
The day after.
Good
for him for doing it.
Yeah. I mean, and I was drinking weekly, I told you at that point. So, but I hadn't shared about it. And so Eric gets on the podcast and he goes, yeah, you and your ayahuasca journeys was a big inspiration for me coming here. And I was like, well, my cat's out of the bag. Like now, and it was this beautiful moment where the universe had called me into sharing about it, whether I was ready or not. It was time to let people know that with responsible use and discernment, these teachers, these plant teachers, have completely shifted the trajectory of my entire life as it has yours. And this podcast would not exist without direct guidance from these plant medicine experiences to follow this.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's cool that I like that you shared that. Thank you. It's cool when you can bounce stuff off with a friend and in almost like wanting to give you advice in that moment of like, you haven't talked about it yet. I can objectify my experience to a whole nother degree. I'm like, this is such a big, beautiful part of your truth. I can't believe you haven't shared that until just recently. And so I'm just grateful for that, because now I can give myself that medicine.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I know, your audience and the majority of mine, they're just like, yeah, what about it? But I think we all have, whether it's like our psychedelic journey or not, we all have that part of our story that will like, I'll give you, these 3 colors, but this 4th one, I'm just going to put over here. And it, if I can objectify it, I can see that 4th color that might be the hardest to share is likely most intertwined with like your dharma, your path, like the cave you fear
and your shadow.
The cave you fear to enter has the treasure you seek, as Joseph Campbell would say.
Yes, nice one.
So I appreciate you for holding my hand.
Yeah.
As you said, the universe was calling me to share this. Even if nothing comes of this conversation, I think the cat's out of the bag, the energy is moving, and now I'm moving forward with this new truth.
I feel like so many people experience this same thing that we're talking about right here as they walk their path of awakening consciousness, especially with their families too. It's like they start to change, and a lot of their family members are just kind of the same, and they're starting to now be awake to their family's patterns in a different way, and they want to help, and yet they don't want to inject themselves because they know we can't really change people in that way. And we want to share that this is a really important part of our lives, and we're experiencing deep healing but at the same time, there's a fear that they won't understand. And for me too, there was this element of talking about this stuff on the podcast. I was like, my elementary teachers might hear this, and like kids I used to babysit might hear whatever the story is. But there's something to be said when you can just fully come into yourself and say, yeah, if one of those people were to walk up to me and ask me about one of my colors, if I really drop into it and I experience their judgment or their questions, what would I say? Would I need to jump into a defensiveness, or would I just share from my heart that, hey, yeah, actually this thing has really impacted me and I love it, in the same way that I would talk about yoga or a really great book that somebody else maybe didn't agree with, had a contentious topic. It's like just coming forward with that mood of offering curiosity, inviting people into the conversation without needing to really defend ourselves.
I love that you touched on the family aspect of it. I was just spent my, Ram Dass says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. I just was with my family all holidays long, tons of healing happening on me. And then in the family structure itself, it's interesting. I felt like I had like I said, this huge introspective journey in Tulum when I got COVID. I came home to my family feeling like a new level of awareness. It almost felt like I changed the chemistry set of my family. Things boiled up, things were addressed. But I love that you mentioned that, because the girl that I mentioned that DM'd me.
The girl or the woman?
The woman. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for catching me. The woman that messaged me, and I've never met her. I don't know her. So she could be 14, she could be 30, but the woman.
Right.
She was referring to, sharing her truth in a new way that she had never had before, and having resistance with her family. And for so long I resonated with that so much, because like you said, I'm healing, I'm discovering these new parts of myself. I just want to share them with my family who I love so much. And I see how they could help. And it put me in this kind of a codependent situation where if they didn't take my advice, I now became the victim. And if they took my advice, now all of a sudden they're they're reliant on me for the next level of growth and the next level of growth. And then it became a process of silencing that part of myself, those colors, to my family. And in the process of now, and then I would project. I think we all project onto others, like I've been saying this whole conversation, their judgments on me are my judgments about myself. Completely. And if my dad, let's say, were like, dude, your calves look horrible, I would just laugh at him. I'd be like, I have no judgments on that. Doesn't trigger anything within me. Right. And
it's only the things that we have attachment to that really hurt us.
And that process of really looking at, like, I feel judged by them. Okay, where am I judging myself right now? It's just I think, and really sitting with that and with the psychedelic side of things, I think articulating to yourself, maybe, in the journal and meditation, sitting with it, where am I judging myself, and how can I work on that and look at that? And with what's been healing for me in my psychedelic journey and really owning, and, I just had an experience last week and I've been talking about it with everybody more than I ever have. Usually this was a very max experience. And this time, whoever is willing to let me bounce this off of, I'm hoping to do that. And a big healing for me has just been bringing my conscious mind to that unconscious thing that happens, that unconscious phenomenon that is a deep psychedelic experience. How can I get my conscious egoic mind on board with that? Eric Godsey talks about, like, the ego can be this wolf, and if you train the wolf, let that wolf work for you. Right. And so for me, a big process of healing that part of myself that I felt like others might judge me for was really, like, studying it, getting my conscious mind on board with it, reading a book about the science behind psychedelics, listening to talks. So I think it's just so fascinating how that can kind of switch when we kind of almost, where am I judging myself and how can I address that?
Beautiful.
Does that resonate?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going back to, I'm thinking about what you were talking about, sharing things with family. You talked about codependence if they take your advice, or kind of frustration or rejection if they don't, and looping again back to what we were speaking about with the way a conscious man shows up is not really reactive one way or the other, you know? And I think that one of the ways in my own life that I dance with that when I'm with somebody where I feel something intuitively that could be of assistance, but yet I want to honor them as sovereign souls and realize that it's impossible for me not to have some projection. We're all mirroring each other all the time. So taking the medicine that arises from within you and saying, is this really the medicine that they need? How do we do that? Sitting with it, asking the intuition that comes up, you know, is this for me just to know, or is this to be shared? You can ask that question on the inner. And then asking for consent, you know, so somebody has a deep sharing and you just listen, and then you listen, and then you listen. And I teach this with the men in the conscious man. I said, and then when she finishes, you leave space and you listen more, because that's often in the space is when people are so used to another person jumping in and immediately taking the reins, but they might not be fully to completion. So the best gift you can give someone is just keep listening. It's that capacity to hold their suffering without taking it on. And then when they are sure they are complete, you can then ask for consent by saying, are you open to hearing an offering or an intuition? Or are you just needing me to just really hear you right now? And allowing and phrasing it in a way that isn't manipulating them into choosing the option with your advice, you know, just like genuine, here it is, clean energy. Would you like this or this?
See that space I just gave you?
You're a fast learner.
That's beautiful. No, I love that. And I was for so long just the guy who would want to give everybody advice, because I was like, well, if I was them, I would want to know this. And I think that was a big learning. It's like, you know, take a pause and listen. And do they need to hear those words from you? What do they actually need from you? And a helpful exercise for me, almost using this idea that everybody's a reflection of me anyways. Let's use my little brother for an example. He has a dark history with addiction, and he's in a sober period, or he's sober now, but still has these huge challenges he faces. And where I used to want to just coach him up and be like, man, you got to try this, man, you got to try this. I really just would sit with his energy and would be with him, and I could feel him struggling a little bit and be like, if, you know, Max, access the addict in you. I can see his suffering and I can see his patterns so clearly, because they reflect mine. You know, I have my own, everybody has something, some addiction. And I asked Max, what would the addict in you need right now? Whoa.
And what was the answer?
So often, and I do that all the time. If someone's anxious, what does the anxious Max need right now? If someone's fearful and like stressed, what does the stressed Max need right now? And so often it's
so sweet
presence.
Yeah.
Like, look at me and tell me it's okay, and that I'm okay, and that I'm not broken.
Yeah.
Just pour faith into me, you know, give me a hug, lighten me up, tell me a joke and just goof off. Tell me this isn't all that serious.
Yes.
And that's, that's been big for me. Not being the savior, not trying to use my words, just trying to use my heart and give everybody the, you know, just the max presence that I would want.
Right. So good.
So good. What are we at in time? When you podcast, you enter a vortex and you have no idea.
No, we've already been going 42 minutes.
Beautiful.
Juicy.
Tell me about your like growing up. And I know, you know, your listeners might have heard this, but the first time I talked to you, I was like, she's playing at, her ground zero is for some people like the Swiss Alps. Like, and it's like just the vocabulary and your normal and what like energetic communication, all that. It sounds like your foundation is truly remarkable. Like maybe we can take that and head into a psychedelic direction that I want to explore with you this time or next. But tell me about, your upbringing and how that set you up for like the foundation you have now.
For sure. Thank you. I was born to two very brave and beautiful parents who really had to do a great deal of renegading in their own lives to kind of break through, free from their familiar structures and religious structures. They both were raised in Catholic households and very, traditional standard medical paradigm and all of this. And they broke free to go on their own soul journeys. And they met each other at chiropractic college, which already is an alternative path, right?
Because especially at that time.
Holistic healing. Yes, right. Because this is 30 years ago. And so they were already taking a lot of flack from their families, sort of like, why don't you become a real doctor? That sort of thing. And they go through just as much schooling as an MD. But it wasn't the way for them. For them, the way was believing in the body's innate ability to heal itself. I have no idea how they came to that based on their upbringings. It's miraculous. And I have no explanation other than like they had just like a soul knowing that this was the way. So they met each other there. And then I had a really a wild, gorgeous childhood where I grew up running around barefoot on like 60 acres of property in upstate New York, myself and my three brothers, and just, tumbling around in the grass and running around the pond. And I always say I would have burrs in my hair and then raspberries between my toes and just free to be. And I remember some of my most blessed moments being lying on my back in the tall grass. It was taller than me. And I would just felt so like safe in the womb of the earth. And I would be looking up at the sky, just so vast. Peace, as a young kid, just peace and just surrounded by the soundscape of nature. And so the earth was my first teacher, and then they put us into a school, an alternative school, a Waldorf school. So there was a lot of outdoor education. There was a lot of being taught through story. There was a lot of spirituality integrated into the curriculum and art and really deepening understanding of alignment, what soul alignment feels like in the spaces of thinking, feeling, and willing. So right word and right action and intention. And then my mom is just such a force. And she is white, but a lot of her friends were Native American. She just kind of attracted that energy to her. And she was just really enamored with the culture. And so some of her best friends were Lakota. And there's a lot of Native American reservations around where I grew up in upstate New York. And I remember us having fires on my property where drum circles would happen under the full moon and the milky light of the full moon reflecting off the pond and people singing around a fire. It felt very sacred and it felt very familiar.
Beautiful word.
Yeah.
Familiar.
Yeah. And the trance of the drum. You know, we all have had that experience of a song that takes you somewhere, right? Whether you're dancing, whether, you know, even if you're out clubbing, like you've had that experience where you lose yourself in a piece of music at one point or another. Losing yourself in the trance of sacred drumming at 9 years old, you know, having a shamanic journey from a Lakota shaman and leaving my body and becoming an eagle in my vision space. This was the portal opening into the psychedelic realms far before I ever consumed a psychedelic substance.
Did your parents help orchestrate transformative events, I thought you said, or?
Yeah. You mean back then or now? Or yeah, so my mom again had that deep earth connection, and she was really, wow, it's so windy, I can hear it.
Yeah.
She was really the type of mom where all the friends wanted to come over to our house because it was so cool and my mom was so cool. And she just had this thing for being the ultimate community mother. And she would help bus kids from the inner city of Buffalo out to our property in the country. And she would lead workshops for the kids where they would, some of them never been on the land like that before and came from, you know, very, very poor home situations. And they're out there, they're collecting sticks to make their own dream catcher, and they're sitting around a fire. Maybe some of them had never done that before. So she would lead these day camps too, and she just loved doing it. So yeah, and now of course, you know, they've transitioned into they have the retreat center in Canada that I told you a little bit about. But these things from a very young age, I think, gave me an incredibly catalyzed start to the journey of an open mind.
Yeah. I mean, that connection to the earth that you mentioned, that just that transcendental experience of being an eagle and then seeing your parents bring these kids in from the city.
Yeah.
And being like, and as a kid, you think your way is the only way. So to have that, even that perspective at a young age, that this isn't the only way, and that people are looking at where you come from with maybe wide eyes.
Right. It was so normal. I mean, everything about it was, growing up, my mom would say, okay, this is how you give Reiki. This is how you send energy. Because my mom, of course, in addition, she knew about acupuncture, she knew about Reiki, she knew about essential oils and supplements and all of these things. And we were all, you know, natural home births.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I remember, again, being a young kid, being shown how to send Reiki energy. My mom would say, okay, I have a headache. Come you put your hands over my crown. Okay, now you send love energy with your hands. And as a kid, you don't question those things. You're like, oh, I know how to do that.
Exactly.
Like your ego doesn't get in the way. And so you just know how to do it, and you trust that you know. And she'd be like, oh, good. Yeah, I feel it. I feel it now. And so reinforcing that trust of my own intuition from a very, very young age, I have my parents to thank for that, for sure. And we would chant together before bed. We would all sing, which now I'm, you know, the last episode of my podcast that we just released, I don't know when this one will come out, but it was on holographic sound healing. And I've been really deepening my interest in sound and understanding how that connects to our bodies, to all things and creation in the universe. Not really tying it back until this moment about how my parents would sound with us. They would tone with us before bed. And so you'd have all these little 4 kids and their voices kind of harmonizing with the tones of my parents. And we would all just sing. Like, it could be as simple as a vowel sound, but there's something so powerful about creating sound together and getting actually in the same resonance with each other. That's what you and I are doing right now.
Yeah. We're calibrating.
Yeah.
Always calibrating.
Yeah.
I loved the vision of like some young kids, and that just makes me excited. Like young kids, you tell them to do something like that and they don't have the ego to get in the way, but then they also bring their imagination, that beautiful imagination to it. And so, oh, you want white light? Oh, I have so much white light to give you.
Why are we not teaching kids that,
Yeah. I mean, and I see just you saying that, and I know how much work in progress and just growth you've experienced since then. But to have that as your foundation, it's like the first thing I wonder is how do people, if that's not their foundation, begin to tap into that intuitive that childlike, like from your perspective, given that was your normal, how where are those first places that you start to encourage someone to, because you're such a beautiful bridge in that way. Like how do you return to that childlike, imaginative, outside the ego, trust your feelings, trust your intuition?
Yeah, trusting the intuition is huge, because if you can get that piece, then you can, we talk about steering from the heart. That's the same space.
Yeah.
It's that place of deep groundedness. The decisions are not being made from chaos. The decision might be a hard one, but it's still not being made from chaos. It's being made from a deep gnosis. That's the intuition. And when I'm working with clients, I always say, who's speaking, and I'm using air quotes right now. There are multiple different voices that show up at different points in the day or in our experience. But the intuition does not argue. It doesn't speak in big, long, logical sentences and talk you in and talk you out. It's just yes, or do it, or don't go. It's these just punch statements where you feel them in the gut or the heart, and you might not want the answer, but you know. And that's the intuition. And small ways that people can practice that is in like low pressure situations. So what am I going to eat for breakfast today? Eggs or oatmeal? And you feel into which one gives you that like punch of a yes inside. And if you practice that over time, then you can get really good at using it with discerning people. You sense an energy that's off and you're like, oh, maybe I'm just making a judgment of them. No, maybe that's the intuition, learning to trust those things and not write yourself off.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, that process is, it's so beautiful, but it definitely challenged a story that, from maybe not as a open-minded family that, so many of us are told like, when you're an adult, it's going to be harder. And when you're an adult, you always can't get what you want. And, you got to work for that. And so that process of following your intuition almost feels, it's not always warm and fuzzy, like you said. That's something I've had to learn. Like sometimes the right thing to do isn't warm and fuzzy, but a lot of the times it does feel lighter. The intuition, when it's guiding you, feels like good. I think it's what Joseph Campbell meant when he said, follow your bliss. It makes you confront that, like, can I really follow that bliss, that good feeling, that lightness, or is that irresponsible?
Right.
And then like a Rumi quote, I'm just a quote person, but
I love that quote, about you.
What you seek is seeking you.
Yeah.
And I think the intuition is always on this guidance of go where you feel light and right. And that
100%.
Is that light and right what you want? Or was that like, are you pushing towards that, or is it pulling you?
Right.
So I just love that reminder. Do it with low pressure situations so you can get to know that yes, no energy. For me, that's just been such a catalyst. Yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. And so many times the yes is, if I was honest with myself, it's what I actually wanted. I just had to overcome my stories and my fears.
Yeah. Yeah. The intuition is not like you really have to do anything. The intuition is just getting quiet to allow the truth to come up to the surface.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And so then what? how have we gotten you here? And I apologize to your listeners who have heard this, but I mean,
No,
it's in a different way.
I don't really know if they have.
And to all of you listening, DM this amazing woman and tell her that you are ready for more on her story, because you have so much medicine to give.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to be following up with you. And because, I work with some amazing podcasters.
Yeah.
I help produce some shows, and I tell them all, like, we need some more solo episodes out of you.
Yeah.
Because the people are dying for it. And you especially.
I need that validation.
I'm excited for you to do that. So I'm excited to ask you these questions. But what were some other, like, how, this is a huge conversation we could have another time. But
yeah,
from that foundation, what were some other big pillars that got you to where you are right now? Was it the psychedelics, would you say? Was one of the final keys in the lock that kind of locked everything into place? Or
I mean, psychedelics were only in the last few years. So I really was a late bloomer. I didn't even smoke cannabis, nothing. Like, I was really straight edge, and I did all the right things, and I went from A to B to C, and I got really good grades. And
which can be spiritual in its own sense, I would say. Like,
completely taught me about discipline.
Not to, make that the lesser evolved being.
No. And it absolutely, like, I can say that I am glad that I waited.
Yeah, I think that's important distinction.
So glad that I waited to open up the Pandora's box of psychedelics until I had a strong foundation in meditation, in my understanding of my emotions, and being able to take responsibility for my perceptions of others, and not just say, well, this person is this way. That's the reality. That's just how they are. Everyone thinks they are that way. No, that's my perception. That's a lot for some people to wrap their minds around, taking responsibility for literally everything that you feel and see and do. So that when you reach that level, you can work so much more deeply with these medicines, and then integration also becomes more smooth, I think, generally. But yeah, psychedelics, and I would say a series of divinely orchestrated, unfortunate events that consistently punctured me. Punctured is actually a gentle word. I feel like I was filleted. And lost people, both like gone from this physical plane and just in the sense of just deep loss and separation. You talked about addictions and your brother. I lost a brother. My stepbrother, Dan, passed away in his very early 20s. I think he was 20. And that like gutted my family and changed me. You cannot view life the same after somebody that close in your family sphere. And, and full disclosure, it's not like he and I had a close relationship. He was, he had definitely been the black sheep a little bit for a while. But that feeling of when someone tells you you're never going to see that person again is like, you can't unfeel that. And that really, in a deep way, put me in touch with the fragility of life, and realizing that I was in a version of it, of my own creation, that was not my highest expression, and having to reckon with that. It was a fine life. It was a perfectly comfortable life that I woke up in when I realized that. I have talked about this a little bit on the show, but I was in my mid-20s. I had a great job teaching at a Waldorf school with kids that I loved, families I adored. I was in a long-term relationship with this wonderful man, and we were on track to get married, and we had the house and the dog and the whole thing. And I felt like a liar in my own life. And I wanted to want it, but I didn't want it. I didn't want it. I wanted to be free. I wanted to get gritty. I wanted to write. I wanted to be creative and messy and taste the gorgeousness of life and be in strange and fascinating places. And I didn't want my white picket life that I was in. And I felt sad about that. So that catalyzed my very abrupt move to New York City and leaving that relationship incredibly abruptly. Like, I would say that I did abandon him. And if he ever hears this, I hope that he knows how I'm getting emotional now, how sorry I am. I love when I cry in my podcast, by the way.
Me too.
Yeah. It's so nice to be asked these questions because normally I'm asking all the questions and people are crying on the other side of the couch, but or we're crying together. But yeah, it's like you have to trust that you did the best that you could at the time with the tools that you had. And I think that's really important for our process of moving forward whenever we have things like that, is expressing the regret, but not staying in the guilt or the shame. Yeah.
What would you might have said to yourself leaving at that time, leaving the cookie cutter and it's so hard when you logically are like, I want this. I want to want this so bad. First off, thank you for being so beautifully and sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt all that. What would you have said to Hallie at that time?
Like before she did it, you mean? Or
maybe, I imagine that transition from not doing it to doing it, whatever might have been at the hardest point. Like, I think a lot of people even in a micro setting can be in a stage there,
Yeah.
Of, I wish I wanted this, but I don't.
I can hear all these dogs barking in the background.
Hello, puppies.
I am so glad that Hallie trusted her intuition in that moment. I think she's a badass woman for leaving the safety of the nest to go follow what her soul knew. If I'd never left that place, I might still be there. I might be married. And I mean, I might have been happy, of course. We don't know. But I can tell you that I am on fire for life in a way that I didn't know was possible. And that came from consistently choosing to lean into the sharp bits and say, oh, this scares you? Great. That means we're feeling alive. Let's keep going. This is probably an indicator that I'm meeting an edge. Let's ride that groove. And I desire to understand this. And the more that you do that, you realize like nothing can hurt you that isn't you. It's all you. It's all you. And so the more you keep being willing to look, as you put it, like look yourself in the face and say, what's really going on here, buddy? And laugh about it and play about it and be brave. You can melt away I'm not going to say all of, most of the fear of living. And you can reach this state where I was having dinner with someone the other night and they asked me about what is your proudest accomplishment? And I said, the fact that if I died today, I could say, good fucking job. Yes, you really lived it. You did not live in fear. You really leaned in and you said yes. And every day you were waking up doing things that you cared about, being with people you cared about.
Beautiful. The death as a catalyst to that is really interesting. I lost a good friend. He was a childhood best friend, and we grew apart, but he was still someone in my life, and healthy, just happy, just passed away from what we think was a heart attack suddenly, a young firefighter. And it's just beautiful to hear the words you used, because that was 2 years ago, and that was a catalyst for me as well, to just be like, what the fuck am I doing? And I was on a version of what I would call like my dharma. I was kind of like tiptoeing towards it, but then I was like, fuck this, let's run, like, let's go. And I loved how you said, I want the messy. I want the
grit.
I want the grit.
The grit, the dirt, the blood, the earth.
I want to write. I want to create. I just want to. And I think that is so beautiful, because I think when you think about death, it's not going to be how polished was my life. Right. How many, how gritty did I get? How much did I just do, like, as if life was a verb, did I life,
Yeah. Did I life?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
That's beautiful.
We need t-shirts that say like, did you life today? That's so good.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I do an end of the year reflection process. And one of the questions is, like, if I were to die today, is there anything that I would have said, man, I wish I did that. And like, if there's an answer to that, it's like, you owe it to your fucking self to do that ASAP. Like, that is your work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's just so beautiful that you're living in a state. I think it's that relationship with fear that you sound like you've developed that leaves you feeling like, yeah, I mean, I did it. If this ended today, obviously you want to keep going. You're on a fun adventure, but yeah, I have no regrets.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, to be transparent, it's not like all the days are good.
No.
And I think that that's important to say. It's not like I'm trying to sit up here being like, my life's great, guys. It's just like always good. It's not. It's like, it's really hard sometimes. And sometimes I do get afraid. It's not that I don't get afraid. And I want to really underscore that. I get very afraid. I go into my little hole sometimes. I get triggered just like everybody. But when I'm there, I refuse to look away. Like we said, it's like, oh, this feels so bad. And I'm going to sit in the fire. Yes. Yes. And thanking it, like energetically, just shifting and like as a mental reframe instead of, oh my gosh, this sucks. I want this experience to end. This hurts so bad, blah, 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 blah. And rehearsing those. It's like, ooh, thank you for purifying me. Thank you for showing me where my learning is. Yes, this deep grief. Thank you, because I know it's a process of letting go. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I think that if we're going to use that verb of lifing, it means you're not going to just be okay living at a 5 or 6 the whole time. You're going to be feeling the 1. You're going to feel like a 2, but then you're going to have days where you're chilling at an 8 or a 9 or a 10. And it's that willingness to feel that full spectrum, all those colors that feels like lifing,
Yeah. Yes. Max, yes. I'm so glad that we did this.
Me too.
You are so incredibly easy to talk to. And I love the flow that we had.
We went all over the place.
Back and forth.
Flop. Yeah, we could. Yes. We'll have to do this again.
We will have to do this again. Yeah. I would really love that. But before we go, just grounding into you and wanting to ask if there's anything that's on your heart that you feel like really needs to be shared. Yeah, that you've been thinking about.
That idea of saying yes, that you touched on, I think it's a continual practice with me. And I spent time writing about this yesterday on my flight to Austin. And just inviting whoever's listening to join me and you in this dance that we're doing, that it's not bypassing ourselves. It's not like the traditional personal development of like, everything's going to be great. Just think positive. It's not, but saying yes to your dharma, your path, and just questioning what that might look like if you were to follow that yes energy, just follow that fear, looking at it, and really trying to articulate to your conscious brain, the ego, even to say like, there are millennia of thinkers that have done amazing things, and they all similarly say something similar. That is, follow that fucking heart of yours. What you seek is seeking you. Like, enter the cave and you'll find the treasure. Like, go the hard way. Get gritty and dirty. And I'm saying this when I listen to this podcast, Max, fucking do the gritty and dirty way.
Yes.
And keep following that and say yes. And I think it's just a dance like no other.
Wow. Beautiful. Beautiful. And this is a final closing to that loop. I feel like saying yes, especially to an emotion, because it's different saying yes to your soul dharma or saying yes to an emotion, is sometimes when I tell people to say yes, they go, well, if I'm experiencing anger, I don't want to say yes to anger, right? It's like, well, why would I want to? But it's not saying, when you're saying yes, it doesn't mean you like it. Let's be clear. Saying yes doesn't mean, oh, I like this, I want more of it. It means this is allowed. And one of my favorite Buddhist American psychologists and podcasters, Tara Brach, always says, I
love her.
Yeah, I know.
Just gave her a point.
Yeah, she always says this too. This too belongs as part of the human experience. To cut myself off from this emotion or this experience is to cut myself off from a piece of me. It's to dismember myself. And what I'm trying to do is remember. Remember myself. So bring, like when I say member, I mean all the parts, the members of ourself, and we're remembering them. We're sewing them together to become whole.
Beautiful. Have a big enough house that everybody's allowed in. That was beautiful.
Also, anyone who wants to learn about their dharma, my favorite book, one of my favorite books of all time, and nod back to Eric Godsey's podcast, is when I was on his episode for the first time, he asked me what my favorite book was, and I said, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And
my soul sister.
Hell yeah.
That's my favorite book too.
No way.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
So anyway, I feel like that's a great thing to just drop at the end of this show as a way to nod people in the direction of their personal legend.
And follow your treasure. Yeah.
Follow your treasure, man.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Well, where can people find you in the ethers, on the interwebs, and how do they sign up for your badass newsletter and all of your things?
I love it. You could, Instagram's usually the easiest place. It's like kind of the central hub. So,
and your handle is?
At Max W. McCoy. And if you just DM me, say hi, and I would send you a voice note. I'll say what up. I like to try to keep it very human. Ask for my newsletter link. I send out ideas and resources and reflections and things that I'm working on in real time, actual resources I'm using in real time that are helping me on this exact path. Because when you're on this path of following your dharma, following your personal legend, it's helpful to have support. And so that is where I dance with that. I have a podcast called Looking Up. Would love to, just come over, check it out. Instagram
Looking Up, and that's on Spotify and Apple, and they can go on Apple and they can hit subscribe and they can give you 5 stars and do all the things.
How about you? If I post this as well?
Yeah.
This is the Thought Room Podcast.
The Thought Room Podcast.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yes. Thought Room Podcast on Spotify, Apple, everywhere. ThoughtRoomPodcast.com. My personal website is HallieRose.com. You can get my free meditation and sign up for my newsletter and all the things there. And then on Instagram at Hallie_Rosebud. So that's HALLIE_ROSEBUD. And also at Thought Room Podcast on Instagram as well.
Perfect. We're going to tag each other up in the show notes. So if you forgot how to spell my name, just check it out in the show notes.
Exactly.
This was beautiful. Thank you so much for having me in your beautiful space you've held here. And this has been amazing to calibrate with you and to remember with you.
Much. Yeah. That is so felt and 1,000% reciprocated. Thank you.
Thank you.